Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and Dota Underlords has just savagely summoned an update, and they have nerfed savages, surprisingly enough, despite the name. 4 savage buff was just by far the most powerful thing that you could have been doing in the previous meta, and this patch definitely addresses that. So let's get right into it. It also makes some other big changes that I think is going to change up the meta quite a bit. Anyway, so some general fixes here. They've improved the sprays, like the board sprays, which are like a cool like little cosmetic thing to kind of taunt your opponents. And so it kind of like fades in rather than just being a passive reveal. So I think it looks really cool. They also added a keybind, so you can spam it even faster and more often. So I would highly recommend doing that to tilt your opponents. Some other general fixes, more bug fixes, more kind of like display and UI things. Nothing too huge or game changing. Big ones, hero changes. Bloodseeker, who was probably the strongest individual unit, at least certainly for his cost, as a 1-cost unit. He used to deal or attack faster based on his own health total. So the lower he got, the more attack speed he would gain. Now instead, as his enemy's health total drops, Bloodseeker will gain attack speed. His target, up to a maximum of 500% attack speed at 25, 30, or 35% of his own of the target's health, rather. Whenever Bloodseeker gets a kill on a target, Bloodseeker will heal 35% of the target's maximum HP. So all of these things used to be based on Bloodseeker himself. He would heal for 35% of his own, and his attack speed would be based on his own health. And he would also be bleeding for 7% of his max health per second. That part has been removed, so he's no longer going to be damaging himself as he's running around trying to kill off the lowest health enemies, but it definitely is a substantial change because he no longer scales really well with things like Stonehull Cloak, because for every kill he would also get bonus health, which means when he healed for 35% of his max health, it was so much more. So that's no longer a very good item on him. It's probably acceptable because he's going to get a lot of kills, but it's not like the most important thing that you need for him anymore. And he also no longer heals if it's just a target that is adjacent to him. He now actually has to get the killing blow. Now, he often gets the killing blow, but it will make him a little bit more vulnerable. Sometimes he would heal up whenever he's stunned and something else small dies right next to him. That will no longer be the case. So overall, I think this is a net nerf. I kind of struggle to see how it could be a buff because Bloodseeker was already so insanely powerful before this. It's really too early though, because this is such a big rework. I've not really played too many games with it. I just got 1 or 2 games on stream before I'm recording this. I didn't really see Bloodseeker do very well in those, and it's hard to say exactly how you want to handle this anymore. Can you still play him in like a dedicated all bloodbound Bloodseeker carry comp? I'm not sure. It's too early to say, but definitely look for an upcoming meta update where we'll hopefully find out the answer to that question and get that in a video coming soon once the meta kind of shakes out over the next day or two. Speaking of the meta update, my previous one, if you've watched that, 3 of the 4 builds that I said were kind of top builds in the meta have all been nerfed, so that one's a little bit out of date. We'll get a new one up as soon as possible. Broodmother, a small change here. Her Spawn Spiderling's ability now prefers to cast it on her current target. Frankly, I didn't know that she didn't. I don't really play with her too terribly much, and yeah, not a really big change. Nothing much worth talking about there. Dragon Knight, his Breathe Fire has been adjusted. He has a shorter cooldown, so he'll cast it a little bit more often. And the duration has been changed to kind of match that. So he still has kind of the same percentage uptime on the debuff, or at least roughly speaking. I haven't done the exact percentages, but the duration is a little bit shorter as of the shorter cooldown. And very importantly, his mana cost has been changed down to just 50 from 100. So he will be casting this much more often. That being said, Dragon Knight is still an ace unit that you really, really need to get to 2-star before he really comes online and is like as powerful as he can be. Compare that to other ace units like Faceless Void to give you powerful alliances. Medusa is just a great carry even at 1-star. Axe is super tanky even at 1-star. And you start to see why Dragon Knight doesn't really fit in with a lot of those. He's an ace where you just can't play him at 1-star and feel good about it in most cases, whereas most of the other aces you can. So still don't think Dragon Knight's a top tier, but this is a good little buff to him to hopefully bring him a little bit closer to some of the ace units. Earth Spirit Geomagnetic Grip will now cast even if the target is magic immune, such as from BKB, Black King Bar. And this is a slight buff to spirits in the sense that he'll actually get to make his cast even if the opponent frontliner has a BKB on, and then he'll be able to participate in a Delta Slam. That being said, it's a pretty small corner case scenario that I don't imagine comes up that often, but it's good to have that kind of consistency that he's going to cast his ability just because you want to get the Delta Slam off. That's probably the main reason you're playing Earth Spirit in the first place. Okay, Lich, Chain Frost. He's also been buffed. He was a little bit lackluster. You notice he wasn't one of those aces I talked about before as one of the top tier aces. So his Chain Frost now bounces 1 additional time at all levels from 6, 9, 12 up to 7, 10, and 13. And the bounce range has changed from 2 to 3. So now if there's an enemy unit within 3 cells of the first target, which is almost always, that's a huge radius, then it'll bounce to that next target. So pretty much no escaping the Chain Frost. So this is a pretty solid buff. That being said, not sure that 6 mages are really back in the meta. I still think the preferred mage build is probably going to be spirits, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Lone Druid Spirit Bearer. Now, Lone Druid was definitely my pick for the strongest unit in the game. Like S tier, S plus tier, like the #1 best unit, Lone Druid. He went so well into Savages, which were really strong. We'll get to that down in the alliance changes. But also his Bear was just so tanky and dealt so much damage and also stunned them. So now, it also dealt damage to the opponent. So now the Spirit Bear will no longer damage the opponent at the end of the round, despite it being like a hero summon in terms of like Dota mechanics. That is no longer how he's going to work in Dota Underlords. He will not deal damage as if he was another hero. So that means Lone Druid Refresher Orb is no longer going to be dealing 29 and 30 plus damage just because you won with everybody and also summoned some extra bears. That won't be the case anymore. Which is good for people fighting against that. And also the Entangle from the Spirit Bearer will no longer stun. It will instead root and disarm, which kind of sounds the same, but it does not include silence. So units can still cast their spells. So if something like a Bristleback gets caught up in the Spirit Bearer's Entangle, it'll still be able to cast his Quill Spray on cooldown, or just any other unit will be able to cast their spell. So good change here. He was definitely by far the best unit in the game, and I think this, along with the Spirit Chain or the Savage change down below, we'll just move him back to a good unit. You know, he'll still be good. He still may even be S tier. But he probably won't be like S plus. Best thing in the game, hands down. Okay, on to the actual big bulk of the changes here, the alliance changes. Now the Savage Alliance, as this patch was named for, was the strongest alliance in the game. You got 4 Savages, and then just suddenly you dealt so incredibly much damage. The Savage Alliance bonus now only applies if you have 2 Savage to all of your Savage units, as it was before. If you have 4 Savage units, it used to apply to all of your Savage units plus all of your heroes. So it would count things like Savage Summons from Lone Druid and Lycan, but it would also count every single one of your heroes, most notably your Hunters. That is not the case anymore. Now instead, it will still apply to all Savage units and all of your allied summoned units, regardless of any alliance. So your Eidolons, your Venomancer Plague Wards, your Arc Warden clones, your Treants from Nature's Prophet, all of those will gain bonus Savage stacks now if you have 4 Savage. If you do manage to get up to 6 Savage, then every allied unit will gain the Savage benefit. So that is the same functionality that it had before. But in order to apply that to all of your heroes, you do need to get up to 6 Savages, which is a pretty big investment. You're going to need an Ace unit. You'll need that Sand King, that 5 cost, or sorry, they're not called Ace units anymore. The 5 cost Tier 5 Sand King, which is pretty rare and hard to find in the late game. And as a slight compensation, I don't even know if that's the right word, they gave +1 damage at 4 Savage. So now it's back to 5, 7, and 10. This will be really interesting to see how this plays out in a 4 Savage plus Summoners and Primordial type build with Arc Warden, Venomancer, Nature's Prophet, and so on. I'd be very curious to see where that goes. It sounds like it could be okay on paper, but I still feel like it's going to be a little bit squishy and won't have as much time to rack up the kills and most of the summons have pretty slow attack speed compared to the hunters that it was typically paired with. Hunters had very fast attack speeds and could stack it up really quick, so that won't be quite as strong as before, but rightfully so. 4 Savage builds were just absolutely too dominant, way too common, and were a little too cookie cutter for how strong they were. Next up, Spirits. The Spirit units will no longer gain mana from damage they deal during a Delta Slam. Now this was something that I kind of thought was a bug, or was like just a weird way that it worked. Normal units, when they cast an ability, whatever that ability damage does not give them mana. They need to gain mana from auto attacks or from taking damage. And Spirits were kind of weird in that regard. Whenever they were doing the Delta Slam, whenever that spirit dealt their damage, they would gain mana. So you'd have something like a Storm Spirit who would have 0 mana because he just cast a spell. And then he enters a Delta Slam with 0 mana. And by the end of the Delta Slam, he comes out of it and he has full mana. And you thought, what the heck? He didn't do anything. And now he's just ready to cast again instantly. And during the Delta Slam, of course, his cooldown was ticking down. So he's just about ready to cast almost instantaneously later. This is definitely a nerf to Spirit builds. They won't be able to spam quite as many Delta Slams. It won't be quite as frustrating where it's like, oh, they deal, all the Delta Slams and then instantly go into another one and you can never target them. You guys are just standing around, walking around, doing nothing. That won't happen quite as much anymore. That being said, this is definitely less of a nerf than, say, the Savage build got, which got completely gutted. And I still think Spirit builds will be pretty popular in the upcoming meta. They may not be like S tier like they were before, but they'll still probably be very popular and still be quite good. Once again, we'll have to wait until I get a better handle on the meta and get a full meta report out here soon. But I suspect Spirits will still be in my top 4, top 5, whatever I put on that next build list. But I doubt they're going to be in the top 1 or 2 spots. But they might be. You never know. Still think they look good. And finally, Vigilant. Whenever an enemy unit casts a spell and is targeted by the Vigilant Alliance, the first attack from each of the units that the targeting change does 50% more damage. Now, this is a really big buff to Vigilant Alliance, like really big. And this is almost like a compensation buff for Hunters losing out on the Savage stacks. 50% more damage per attack, and that's every time you swap targets, which, if you have a couple Vigilant, that is going to be going very often. I'd be very curious to see if somebody can make a 4 Vigilant build work. It sounds pretty good on paper now that basically, every time you swap targets, you're going to get a 50% damage bonus. That being said, we'll have to find a better core for them to work around, because previously, you'd run Wind Ranger and Mirana and Drow Ranger, and there's 3, and then you just run a bunch of Savages, and you never get up to 4 Vigilant. Even if you don't get up to 4, just running 2 or 3 Vigilant sounds really strong, as every time your Hunters swap targets, they're going to hit really hard, at least initially. So definitely a good quality of life change there. A lot of people were kind of viewing the Vigilant Alliance as a negative alliance, like a drawback, because, you're just constantly swapping targets. And I don't think that's something that should be in the game, a negative alliance. I guess there is a design space for it, but something like this, which was clearly, I think, intended to be a positive alliance, was viewed by a lot of people as a negative, so this kind of buff makes a lot of sense. That being said, this meta is going to shake up a lot. Things that I think are still going to be good: Knights and Healers were the 4th build on my previous video, meta snapshot, which you can see linked down in the description below, that was untouched by this patch. I guess Dragon Knight got buffed, so technically they got buffed, but you didn't even often play Dragon Knight in those kinds of builds. Those are still looking really strong. I think those are going to be the default, popular build in the upcoming meta. If somebody can make some kind of good Savage build, we'll see if that does work out. Hunters now can rely a little bit more on the Vigilant Alliance rather than on Savages. Spirits still look strong. And I've heard reports that Heartless has been kind of creeping up in popularity, like 4 or 6 Heartless builds. I can't really confirm that just yet. I've tried it a little bit to kind of medium success. And then, of course, Bloodseeker may still be good, but this is such a big change, it's hard for me to evaluate that without more games. So, hope you enjoyed it. I know that this was a lot of changes that's going to really dramatically shake up the top builds in the meta, but I think for the better overall. Still going to be a little bit worried about Knights being too good, but we'll have to see how that all shakes out. Thank you so much for watching, and do stay subscribed to the channel and look for an upcoming meta report. And if you join the channel, become a member, and help support me to continue making this kind of content, you will get access to guides like that early. So you get that access a day or two early before everyone else, so that you can be ahead of the meta and help you climb some ranks. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.